Hey guys, tonight we're going someplace quiet, cold, yes, but not harsh, not unwelcoming. Tonight, we walk along the earliest shores of Iceland, long before the place was carved up by Viking legends and saga poets, before tourism and volcanoes, before even the first houses had names. We're going to listen to the first people who arrived and stayed, not with conquest, but with patience. Of course, if you think you'll make it through a whole journey to a windswept, moss blanketed island full of mist, sheep, and soft spoken settlers without dozing off long before we reach the first parliament, you probably won't, and that's perfectly fine. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Post your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You arrive just before the sky decides what kind of light it wants to offer. It isn't night, but it isn't quite morning either. The horizon looks distant but low, as if the clouds have pressed down to meet it halfway. Everything smells like salt and ash and something you can't name. Maybe seaweed, maybe the ghost of smoke from fires long since gone cold. You step off a weathered drift log onto dark sand. Iceland's southern shore stretches out in both directions, uneven and oddly quiet. There's no surf roaring in your ears, no birds flapping overhead in dramatic arcs, just a low sound, far off, a ripple or a hum. The land doesn't announce itself, it waits. The sand beneath your feet isn't warm, and it isn't soft. It's volcanic, ground from ancient lava, black and fine, peppered with stones that feel like glass worn down by time. You kneel, pick up a piece. It's cold but smooth, with tiny air pockets frozen inside like old breath. No houses yet, no fences, no farmsteads, just earth and sea, just stone and sky, somewhere in the near distance. A few birds are calling, not screaming, not warning, just checking in. The kind of call a creature makes when it wants to know who else is awake. And you are. You walk slowly inland, just a little, toward the base of a moss-covered ridge. The land rises gently here, not with cliffs or jagged crags, but with folds, like someone pressed their hand into soft dough and then let it rise. Patches of green creep in, thin grass, pale lichen, moss that cushions your steps. Everything feels like it's been muted, like even the ground is whispering. No roads, no paths. And yet someone came here, long before the Norse longboats arrived, with their carved dragon heads and sails full of wind. There were rumors, gentle ones, of earlier footsteps. There's a debate, still, among historians and archaeologists. A quiet one, befitting the island. Were Irish monks the first humans to set foot here? It's not certain. The early Icelandic chronicles mention them, papar. They were called solitary men of prayer, drifting across the sea not for conquest or fame, but for peace. Maybe they came, maybe they didn't. But the idea of them lives here figures wrapped in wool, sitting by cold streams, carving crosses into whalebone, and reading psalms aloud to no one but birds. No ruins remain, just speculation, and a few scholars pointing to fragments of early Christian texts found near Reykjavik, worn thin by damp centuries. You follow a shallow stream now, so shallow you can see the pebbles, like silver teeth grinning from beneath. The water moves fast, but it doesn't make a sound. It slips by like it knows it's not the main character. There's a ridge up ahead. Nothing dramatic, just a slope that looks like it might offer a view. You climb slowly. The wind picks up just enough to find the gap in your cloak. You feel it touch your neck and then slip away. From the top, the coast stretches wide. Long rolls of fog press against the land like a tide made of breath. You can't see far, but that doesn't matter. You can hear it. Iceland doesn't speak in noise. It speaks in steadiness, wind that moves in long curves, soil that doesn't crumble, just waits, air that smells faintly of iron, like water that's forgotten it used to be ice. This was the land that welcomed Iceland's first true settlers, not with bounty, not with beauty, but with space, a place wide enough to hold both silence and survival. And as you descend the ridge, your feet pressing gently into moss that seems grateful to be noticed, you begin to understand what kind of people would choose to stay. Not those who needed gold, not those who sought glory, but those who knew how to listen. You wake before the light changes, not because of noise, because of quiet. A stillness so complete it feels like something has been removed from the world, not stolen. Just set aside so the day can begin gently. You blink slowly, and above you, low clouds drift with the weight of slow thoughts somewhere behind them. The sun is trying to remember where it rises. You stand near the coast again. Same black sand, same distant gull calls. But now there's something else, a faint impression in the soil, not a footprint. Exactly, just a curve in the moss, the kind of trace that vanishes if you ask it to explain itself. You follow, and you begin to wonder who, truly, came first. The Icelandic sagas, written down centuries later, speak confidently of Norse settlers from Norway, farmers, chieftains, outcasts, and craftsmen who braved the sea in search of land and independence. But those stories begin in the 870s CE. Before that, there's a hush, a gray space in the record, and that's where the monks come in. They're known as the Pauper, a name that echoes like a footstep on stone. Early Irish Christian hermits, it's believed, who sought solitude in places too wild or too quiet for ordinary life. Some scholars suggest they drifted north in tiny boats, curraghs, made from leather and wood, guided by faith and ocean current more than any desire for conquest. There's no saga for them, just hints, a scrap of Latin scripture found in a cave, a small cross etched into the wall of a lava tube, the Icelandingabok, Iceland's Book of Settlements, written in the 12th century, mentions that the Norse found these men here, Christian men, but that they left behind only bells, books, and staffs. You pause along a stream and try to picture it. A single man in a coarse robe, barefoot, kneeling beside a driftwood cross stuck into a stone crevice. Maybe he prays. Maybe he just watches the tide, lips moving without words, not converting, not planting flags, just being. You step again, your foot brushing a patch of flattened grass. Could it have been a sleeping mat, a prayer stone, or just moss that bent for the wind? We'll never know. Modern archaeology has offered little confirmation. Some say the traces attributed to the Pauper were misinterpreted, that the crosses were Norse, not Celtic, that the scripture arrived later, that the myth of Irish monks was a later Christian embellishment, a way to give Iceland a holier origin. But the silence is compelling. You keep walking, this time along a ridge of basalt columns that rise like organ pipes from the ground. They don't ring when you touch them, but they feel resonant, each one cold, upright, listening. The land is volcanic, shaped by fire and cooled by centuries of snow. There are no grand trees, no bustling animals, only low grasses, short shrubs, and the occasional flash of bird wing between stones. You come across a small hollow, sunken slightly, ringed with stones, perhaps a fire pit, or a foundation, or just a place someone once sat. You kneel beside it. The wind moves through your hair, through the grass, and you find yourself trying to hear what never tried to be remembered. That's what makes this part of the story so quiet. It isn't forgotten. It was never loud. It's tempting to imagine the Papar as gentle men with long beards and soft chants, offering simple wisdom to the sea. But maybe they were afraid. Maybe they were lost. Maybe they only stayed a season. Maybe they were only stories. But even stories leave footprints. The Norse would come later, by sail and map and family name, but here, in this earliest moment, there's something softer, a presence not shaped by power, but by retreat, not discovery, withdrawal, an island not conquered, chosen. You stand now at the edge of a cliff, not high, just steep enough that the ocean breathes louder here. The air tastes like old stone. You look down. The waves hit the rock in slow cycles, as if they're reminding it of something. And maybe this is what the Popper found, a land with no armies, no kingdoms, just wind and time. You crouch and press your palm to the ground. It's cold, but not unfriendly. You don't need to speak, because maybe they didn't either. The morning comes in layers. Light is no longer guessed. It's present, though soft, like parchment held up to the sun. You follow a faint path now, not a trail so much as the suggestion of movement, traced in flattened grass and memory. The land dips gently ahead, curling into a narrow valley where mist still clings to the ground like low breath. And that's where you see it, a boat, or what's left of one, not standing proud on the water, but resting on a dry patch of earth, its ribs cracked and its hull filled with moss and silence. The wood is silver gray, smoothed by decades of weather and waiting. It doesn't look wrecked. It looks like it arrived, and then never left. This boat tells a different story. It belongs to those who came after the monks, after the wandering, the whispers, the solitary crossings. These were people who brought not just faith, but families, Norse settlers. They didn't drift in leather boats. They arrived in longships, ships with dragon heads carved at the prow, not for war, but for warding off sea spirits. Ships filled not with soldiers, but with sheep, tools, children, salted meat, bags of rye, barrels of hope. The sagas say they left Norway because of a king, Harald Fairhair, a man gathering lands and tightening rules, a man who demanded loyalty. For many, it was too much. So they left, not as exiles, not as raiders, but as settlers, as seekers of a different kind of life, one with fewer kings, more wind, fewer taxes, more land. You kneel beside the boat and run your fingers along the cracked wood. The grain is raised, coarse. This vessel once crossed an ocean. It doesn't seem possible, and yet it did. The North Atlantic is not gentle, but Norse sailors were skilled. They read the waves like lines on a page. They knew when to wait, when to follow birds, When the wind turned wrong and the sea whispered, "Not today," you rise and follow the curve of the valley, where the grass begins to show signs of movement, flattened circles, stone piles, nothing dramatic. But if you look with the right eyes, you begin to see them. Farms, small ones, early ones, the very first, perhaps. Nothing permanent, just low walls built from stone and sod, curved around patches of land where barley might grow if the frost stayed away, and sheep might graze if the soil held. So you step inside one of the outlines, a rectangle, barely knee-high. It might have been a sleeping room, or a storeroom, or a place to wait out a storm. The stones are cool beneath your fingers. They don't tell you what they held, only that someone once thought it worth building. According to the Land Namabok, the Book of Settlements, the first Norseman to arrive in Iceland with the intent to stay was Ingolfur Arnarsson, around 874 CE. He and his household arrived with animals, servants, and a belief in what could be made from what was found. He threw his high seat pillars into the sea upon approach, symbols of authority, and vowed to settle wherever they washed ashore. They landed in what is now Reykjavik, and so he did too. That's the official version. But hundreds followed him. Many more came quietly, with no fanfare, no saga, just tools and the names of their ancestors, and a determination not to conquer the land, but to adapt to it. You hear something behind you, nothing threatening, just the rustle of hooves, a sheep, then another, and then you realize you're in the middle of a tiny herd, ambling slowly over the stones. Their wool is thick, rougher than modern breeds, their eyes calm. One pauses beside you and chews, not with interest, just with presence. These were the lifeblood of the early settlers. Sheep gave wool, milk, meat, and warmth. They fed the land and the people alike. Entire farmsteads rose or fell with the strength of the flock, and they needed watching, not because they wandered far, but because the land could change fast. You follow the sheep until they pass beyond a low ridge. Ahead, Centaur, a stream splits into several tiny forks. Someone's arranged flat stones across them. Not a bridge, just stepping places. You step lightly, too. The Norse didn't arrive here with grand ambitions. Iceland had no gold, no great cities, no armies to conquer. What it had was silence, space, time, and the possibility of building a life out of weather and moss and patient stone. Not all settlers stayed. Some found the winters too long, the soil too thin, the isolation too loud. But some remained, and in doing so, they wrote a new kind of story, not in battles or crowns, but in stacked turf and sleeping sheep, in loaves baked underground, in families warmed by smoke and shared walls. You step over the last stream fork and look up. There, just visible through the mist, is the outline of a roof, low, covered in grass, almost invisible. You smile, because now the land is starting to answer back. You step carefully across the mossy threshold of the structure, if it can be called that. It doesn't rise. It sinks. The roof barely clears your shoulder. Its shape seems less like a house and more like a natural interruption in the hill, disguised with turf, stitched with roots. It doesn't announce its presence. It rests. This is a farmstead, a very early one. It's made of turf and stone, no carved beams, no painted walls. Wood is scarce in this land. Trees don't grow tall here. What wood existed in the early days came from the sea, driftwood bleached by salt and softened by distance, or it came on ships, precious and hoarded, a gift from one shore to another. You crouch slightly as you enter. Inside, your eyes adjust to the dimness. A long, narrow room, stone benches pressed into the walls, a fire pit in the center, cold now, but blackened with use. Above it, a skin opening in the turf roof lets light and smoke escape in equal measure. On one end, a thick fur is spread over a raised platform. A bed. On the other, shelves carved into the earthen wall hold a small wooden bowl, a chipped knife, a coil of wool. It smells like ash and earth and old milk. You sit near the pit. There are no windows, just the smoke hole above and a gap beneath the door that lets in a stripe of light. But it's not dark. The interior glows in a low, brown way, as if the walls have memorized firelight and are slowly releasing it back to the room. You run your hand along the turf wall. It's dense, layered. Early Icelandic houses were not flimsy shelters. They were crafted carefully, one sod block at a time, cut from grass-covered soil with long knives and stacked like bricks. The walls insulated better than stone, breathed better than wood, and they lasted so long as they were cared for. A scholarly consensus exists that these early turf homes were modeled on both Norwegian longhouses and local necessity. Iceland's materials dictated the form. No tall forests, no tall walls, no easy bricks. Use what the earth offers. Builders listened to the land and then mimicked it. You shift slightly and hear the faint crunch of dried grass beneath your foot. A small bundle rests near the fire pit. Dried herbs, possibly, or wool, or bedding. It's impossible to say. In a home like this, everything has a purpose, and every purpose overlaps. Outside, you hear footsteps, soft, not hurried. A woman enters. She doesn't greet you. She doesn't have to. She carries a small pot and places it near the pit. Then she kneels and begins to stir its contents with a carved stick. It smells faintly of butter and barley. Not strong, just warm. You sit quietly while she works. This is not hospitality in the modern sense. No fanfare, no serving bowls, just the quiet expectation that another presence is neither intrusion nor novelty, just part of the rhythm. Early Icelandic settlers built these homes close to their animals, sometimes sharing walls, sometimes sharing space. Cows and sheep weren't just for milk and meat. They were heat sources. Their breath helped warm the interior air during long winters. Their movement meant life. Some fringe interpretations of early sagas note that the line between household and barn was thinner than later histories suggest. In some homes, the cow stall was separated from the sleeping space by only a low wooden slat. It wasn't considered unsanitary. It was practical. You hear a low clinking behind you, metal on stone. Someone is sharpening a blade, or perhaps just testing its edge. No tension, just the quiet sound of preparation. The woman beside the fire finishes stirring. She sets the pot aside. The smell lingers, milk and something slightly sour, like cheese in its first moments, or butter in its last. She wraps the pot in cloth and places it on a shelf. It will be someone else's meal later, or part of a trade. You notice now that the house has no corners, or rather, none that feel sharp. Everything is rounded, smoothed, not from polish, but from years of hands, years of breath. This is a house built to wait out weather, to carry warmth, to bend, not break. Outside, the light shifts, not brighter, just more certain. A patch of sun slips through the roof hole and falls across the opposite wall, revealing a faint line scratched into the turf. It's not a symbol, not a rune, just a tally. 4 vertical lines, a diagonal slash across them. It could be days, or sheep, or loaves, or winters. Early settlers didn't always record their lives in saga or song. Sometimes they counted in marks. Sometimes the walls knew what the people forgot. You run your fingers along the scratch. It's shallow, but deliberate. The house is still, and it remembers. You step outside and breathe in the air again. It tastes different now, warmer, but edged with salt. The sea is not far. Behind you, the turf house blends back into the hillside, as if it were never a house at all. But you know better. It was a beginning. You leave the turf house behind like a soft exhale. Nothing slammed, nothing closed, just the gentle return of a space to its resting state, outside. The light is a little stronger now, though never harsh. This land doesn't shine. It glows, softly, as if the sky, too, has learned the value of quiet endurance. You walk slowly through an open valley, the ground rising and falling in long, thoughtful undulations. Tufts of grass bend in the breeze, not pressed down but persuaded. You pause as a bird calls once, sharp and quick, then vanishes into the silence again. A small flock of sheep ambles in the distance, white smudges against green, and behind them, a woman. She's wrapped in a thick woolen cloak, weather-worn, the hem darkened by dew. Her pace is steady, patient. She carries no staff, no dog trots at her heels, just her, and the sheep, and the valley. You follow at a respectful distance, watching the rhythm unfold. This is the work of the day, not farming, not harvesting, not building, though all those things will come. This is tending, listening, waiting. Iceland's first settlers quickly learned that the land wasn't something to be conquered. It had to be collaborated with. And the first collaborator was grass. Grass was everything. It fed the animals that fed the people. It held the soil in place. It cushioned shoes, stuffed bedding, reinforced turf walls in the earliest farms. A well-tended pasture was more valuable than a barn full of grain. But grass had rules. It grew slowly. It vanished under snow for months. It died if overgrazed. So the settlers learned patience, rotations, rituals, letting land lie quiet, even when mouths were hungry, not from kindness, from necessity. The woman stops near a shallow stream. The sheep gather loosely around her. She kneels, dips her hands into the water, then scoops a little toward a bowl tied at her hip. You see her offer it to a lamb. It drinks. Nothing is said. Mainstream archaeology confirms that Icelandic sheep, descended from Norse breeds, were crucial from the very beginning. They provided meat, milk, and wool. Yes, but also community. Families were measured not just by land, but by flock in early legal codes. A man's wealth was often counted in sheep. You sit on a low stone and watch as the flock begins to move again, not driven, just guided. The woman walks slowly behind them, allowing the valley to make the decisions. Where to go, when to stop. She doesn't control, she participates. A small figure appears on the far side of the pasture, perhaps a child. They carry a sack. You realize they've been gathering something, moss, maybe, or herbs. They wave briefly toward the woman, who lifts her chin in reply, nothing more. This is not drama. This is life. You begin to understand how Icelandic families survived not on strength, but on softness, not by building upward, but by settling inward, a culture of cooperation, not just among people, but with time itself. There's a fringe theory, seldom cited in formal publications, that suggests the rhythms of early Icelandic settlement were shaped less by law or myth and more by grazing patterns, that the stories came later. Once the sheep had eaten their fill and the families had warmth enough to speak, you smile. It doesn't seem far-fetched. You walk slowly now, following a faint trail worn by feet and hooves. The grass here is lower, perhaps grazed, perhaps trampled, perhaps simply waiting to return. You pass a low wooden fence, nothing permanent, just driftwood and rope. Beyond it, a small pen, empty now, but you can picture the animals there at dusk, curling into the straw, the humans nearby, counting them not with voice, but with eyes. Further on, you come to a stack of wool, cleaned, carded, and wound into coarse bundles. It rests beneath an overhang of turf, protected from wind and sky. Early Icelanders didn't treat wool as scrap. It was woven into cloaks, mittens, sails. It lined boots, covered beds. It absorbed rain and held warmth. A single good fleece could become 6 different things. You reach out and press your hand to one of the bundles. It gives slightly. Not soft, but steady. That's the word that comes to mind, over and over, as you walk this landscape. Steady, not resilient. That implies opposition, just willing, a kind of survival that doesn't announce itself, that simply continues. You find yourself at the edge of a shallow ridge now, looking down toward a cluster of farmsteads. Smoke rises gently from turf-roofed chimneys. A dog barks, once, then stops. The sound is not sharp. It's part of the air. Someone below calls out. A short word, maybe a name, but it's not repeated. There's no rush. You sit. The wind brushes the back of your neck, and the sun, such as it is, leans low against the sky. A sheep bleats, a child laughs, and the valley listens, not for permission, just for rhythm. The path now curls away from the open pasture and dips into a narrow stretch of low ridges and gentle slopes. Grass gives way to gravel. Stones crunch softly underfoot. The land narrows here, as if ushering you forward into a more personal part of the island's memory. You follow, not hurried, the bread-like scent of distant fires warming the breeze. Ahead, you notice a man crouched on one knee. His cloak is pulled close against the wind, and his hand is flat against a rock. You approach slowly. He doesn't move, not in surprise or alarm. He's pressing a mark into the stone, not carving, just pointing. You kneel beside him and trace the same surface. There's no inscription, no runes, no letters, but the shape of the rock itself is remarkable flat on top, jagged on one side, and painted with lichen like a map made by weather. He speaks a single word, so quiet you barely hear it, a name of this place, perhaps just a sound he's repeated often enough that it became a title. Then he stands, brushes his hands, and walks on. You've just witnessed one of the most underappreciated rituals of early Icelandic life, the naming of the land. Before it was ruled or recorded, it was seen, walked, touched, and named, not in conquest, but in recognition. The Book of Settlements, Landnámabók, catalogs hundreds of names, Fjords, valleys, hills, stones, streams, given by the first Norse arrivals. But these weren't grand ceremonies. They were quiet designations, a way to speak to the earth and be remembered. Some names reflected function griota, Stone River. Others, emotion Sorgerfell, Sorrow Hill. Some were deeply personal Ingolfshöfti, named for the settler who chose to stay. And some, historians admit, were likely jokes. There is a hill simply named Biggish, another labeled probably not a good spot, but most names stuck because to name something in this place was to witness it. You continue walking. A narrow stream crosses your path, barely wider than your foot. A line of stones guides the way across. You step from one to the next, imagining how someone might have crossed here centuries ago and paused, as you just did, and said quietly, "Stream of the iron cloud," or "where the lamb slipped," and that was enough. The name would stay. A bit further on, you come to a low stone circle, not a house, not a fort, just stones, arranged in a pattern that seems accidental until you realize they're all facing the same direction, toward a glacier in the distance, just a streak of white between two dark mountains. You sit. This, too, could have a name. Maybe it does. Fringe scholars sometimes argue that Iceland's first settlers used naming not only as geography, but as memory, a verbal archive of places loved, feared, lost, survived. In the absence of writing, place names preserved stories. This is where the sheep ran off. This is where father saw the aurora. This is the rock that hummed. You look at a nearby stone, short, wide, flecked with moss, and wonder if it's ever been spoken to. You whisper something, not a name, just a noticing. You rise and follow the valley again, where the land opens into a wide, shallow basin surrounded by low hills. You hear a voice ahead, calm, carrying, reciting something, not for you, for the air. A group of people stands in a circle around a rock. One speaks, the rest listen. You pause at the edge, far enough to avoid disrupting. The speaker pauses between phrases, allowing the silence to soak in. There is no text, no scroll, no pulpit, just the rhythm of someone saying what has been said before. Maybe a poem, maybe a list, maybe a law. In early Iceland, the Alþingi, parliament, was conducted outdoors. On the plain of Thingvellir, laws were spoken aloud each summer. The law speaker, elected by peers, was not just a judge. He was a memory, a living scroll. What couldn't be written had to be remembered, and what was remembered had to be heard. You watch the circle of listeners. No one interrupts, no one repeats. When the speaker finishes, he steps back. Someone else takes his place. The voice changes. The silence does not. You step away before the next speech begins. Back on the trail. The grass grows long and golden. The sun, yes, even here, casts low light that softens every edge. You pause on a small rise, looking back toward the valley. You name it, not aloud, but just enough that you'll remember it when your eyes close later. Because that's what naming does. It lets the land stay with you, and lets you stay with the land. The wind moves differently now, not harder, not colder, just more certain. It carries purpose. The path you follow narrows between two low ridges, guiding you to a wide, open plain. The grass here is short, almost groomed. Though no hand has cut it, it's simply worn by footsteps and time. You pause. The air feels heavier, not with burden, but with meaning. This is not a place of farming or grazing. It is a place of gathering. Ahead, on a slight rise, you see a flat slab of stone, dark, broad, resting like a quiet anchor in the landscape. Around it, nothing. No fence, no wall, just space. You've reached the site of an early Althingi, Iceland's first parliament, but not the kind held in halls or palaces. There's no throne here, no crown, just open sky and earth that remembers being listened to. You approach slowly, your footsteps muffled by grass. A man stands at the stone, tall, cloaked, calm. Around him, a scattered group sits or leans or simply stands, listening. No raised voices, no applause, just words, spoken one at a time, each one allowed to land, to breathe. This is how law was made in Iceland's early centuries, by voice, by presence, by repetition. The law speaker stands at the center of it all, elected for 3 years. He recites from memory the laws of the land, 1/3 each summer. Not from paper, from mind, from discipline, from trust. The crowd listens. They are not passive, but they do not interrupt. They remember. The Althingi was founded around 930 CE, just a few decades after the first settlements. It wasn't imposed by a king. It wasn't overseen by a lord. It was created by free men, chieftains and farmers, who agreed, quite simply, that disputes should be resolved somewhere other than with swords. It was a radical idea, whispered gently. You sit at the edge of the gathering, near a cluster of stones shaped like seats. There's no sign to tell you who sat where, but it's said that the best listeners always sat closest. The law speaker continues. He's speaking of inheritance now, who receives what when a man dies. The words are practical, but not cold. They carry weight. You can hear it in the way he pauses, not for effect, but for memory. Mainstream historians admire the Althingi for its democratic elements, an early form of representative rule, with no monarchy, no class-bound voting. But others remind us it was also exclusionary. Women were not permitted to speak there. The enslaved were voiceless. Justice, like the wind, didn't always blow evenly. Still, there was something remarkable in the structure disputes settled by talk, agreements sealed by nod, oaths made without ink. A fringe scholar once suggested that Iceland's landscape itself shaped the legal process, that with no cities, no walls, and no king, there was no place for courtroom drama, only open plains, only words. You sit and listen to the way the speaker ends his recitation with silence, not a conclusion, a pause, long enough to make space for thought. Then another man stands. He speaks of livestock theft. The group shifts slightly, and someone nods. It's easy to miss. But beneath the formality is something softer cooperation. You wander away after a while, not because you're unwelcome, but because you understand the rhythm now, and it's not made for visitors. You follow a small path leading away from the plain. On your left, a low creek runs quietly over stones. On your right, the slope of a hill. Above, clouds move with more purpose than the people. You pass a patch of flattened earth with small stones arranged in a circle. A cooking site, perhaps, or maybe a place for private agreements. It's said that after the formal sessions of the Althingi ended, disputes were often settled elsewhere. Quiet conversations over shared food, small compromises among neighbors. because the official law could only say so much. The rest was lived. You reach the top of the hill and look back. The group remains at the stone. The speaker continues, his words thin in the wind now, but still audible if you try. No one shouts, no one gestures wildly. The decisions made here are not recorded in marble. They are remembered in voices, in the turn of a phrase, in a silence that holds meaning. You look at the stone again, black, broad, unmoving, and you realize there is no gavel, only ground, and it has been fair. For now, you walk away from the plane of law with slow, steady steps, the kind of steps you take when your body knows not to interrupt the stillness you've just left. Around you, the land shifts again, less open now, more personal. Mounds and folds of earth rise like buried thoughts. A small grove of wind-bent trees leans together as if sharing secrets you aren't meant to overhear. There's a house ahead, not large, not loud. The roof blends into the hillside, tufted with grass, and smoke trickles from a small chimney made of carefully stacked stone. You walk quietly toward it, not from caution, but from understanding. Places like this say ask to be approached gently. You duck through the low doorway. Inside, it's warm, not bright, never bright, but warm in that slow, weighty way that fire and breath and old wood create over time. The light comes from a small flame in a stone hearth, its smoke curling lazily upward toward a soot-stained vent. The smell is a blend of old wool, sweet smoke, and dried herbs. Around the fire, 3 people sit. One stirs something in a pot, one winds wool around a spindle. The third, the eldest, just sits, staring into the flames with the still patience of someone waiting for the right moment to begin. Then, without fanfare, the story starts, not in a loud voice, not with once upon a time, just a single line, low and plain. The boy stepped out into the snow, holding the sword he had not earned. No names yet, no place, just an image. You settle against the wall and listen. This is how sagas begin, not on parchment, but in rooms like this one, spoken aloud, repeated, remembered, and slowly, over years, made permanent. Iceland's great literary tradition, its sweeping family epics and layered legends, didn't start in scriptoriums. It started here, in turf houses, by firelight. Mainstream historians trace the oldest surviving sagas to the 12th and 13th centuries, written down long after the events they describe. But the stories themselves, they were much older, passed by memory, sharpened by voice, each version refined by the pauses of the teller, the stillness of the listener. The saga being spoken now unfolds gradually, a journey, a wrong, a reckoning. There's no dramatic rise, no swelling music, just steady details, the color of a horse, the shape of a fjord, the way a man refuses to meet another's eyes across a longhouse table. You glance around the room. No one moves much. The wool continues spinning. The pot continues to stir. But the energy in the room has turned inward. The words fill it. There's a passage about a winter too long, and a child who brings in a sheep alone. Someone nods, not because they like the story, because they remember something like it. The sagas weren't fantasy. They weren't myths. They were community memory. Stories of ancestors, of neighbors, of feuds and frost and silence. A saga could stretch over generations, tracing the line between weather and honor, between hospitality and revenge. A fringe theory, more poetic than proven, suggests that sagas served as social insulation, a way to keep the community warm during long, dark winters. If people remembered what had happened, what decisions led to what ends, they could avoid repeating certain mistakes. A kind of quiet morality, laced into the rhythm of names and actions. The storyteller pauses. A log shifts in the hearth. The tale resumes. You lose track of time, not because the story meanders, but because it flows like weather. It happens at its own pace. You're not meant to chase it, you're meant to drift with it. Eventually, the saga ends, not with a death, with a silence. The fire pops once. No one claps. The eldest speaker leans back, closes their eyes, and says nothing more. You remain seated for a moment, unsure if it's time to leave or if the silence is another story starting. But eventually, the others begin to move again, stoking the fire, wrapping wool, checking the pot. You step outside. The stars are beginning to show. No bright constellations, just pinpricks, quiet, determined. You look back at the house, now dim behind its turf shell. You realize that some stories are not meant to be remembered for their plots. They're meant to be remembered for how they sounded, and how they made the silence that followed feel full. The wind has gone quiet now, as if even it has paused to listen. You step carefully along a narrow footpath that winds between soft rises in the land. The earth is spongy beneath your feet, moss, compacted soil, the quiet labor of 1,000 years of frost and thaw. The scent of wood smoke still clings to your cloak, somewhere in the distance. A dog barks once, then nothing. Ahead, a cluster of low structures emerges from the dark. They aren't built atop the land so much as within it. The walls are thick, earthen, stitched together with turf and time. The roofs slope downward, heavy with grass and the memory of rain. From above, you might not even see them. These are turf houses, not replicas, not ruins, just houses. They feel as old as the soil they rest in. You step toward one of them and gently push open the wooden door. It doesn't creak, it exhales. Inside, the light is dim, but the warmth is immediate. You smell it before you see it: wool, peat, smoke, wood oil, damp stone. It's not unpleasant, it's familiar, in the way that something can be familiar even if you've never experienced it before. The room is narrow, but not cramped. The walls curve slightly inward, made of layers of turf, packed around rough stones and occasional wooden beams. You run your hand along one side. The surface is firm, but soft-edged. It doesn't reject your touch. It accepts it. This is insulation. This is architecture that listens. Iceland's early settlers built these homes not as fortresses, but as shelters wrapped in layers of earth to keep in heat, to soften the wind's voice, to survive the dark. Mainstream scholars agree the design of turf houses wasn't ornamental. It was practical, elemental. The timber that was available, driftwood mostly, was used sparingly. The rest came from the land itself. And inside the inside was life. You hear someone shifting in the adjoining room. The walls don't carry voices easily. That's on purpose. A quiet word so remains a quiet word. You pass through a low arch into the main living space. There's a long bench against one wall, draped with coarse blankets. A cradle sits nearby, empty but gently rocking. The fire is banked for the night, low and steady. A pot hangs above it, perhaps filled earlier with barley and milk, maybe a little butter. Nothing rich, just enough. On the wall, small items hang from pegs: a pair of shears, a spindle, a net. Each one speaks of a different task, but all belong to the same rhythm, the rhythm of doing what needs doing, quietly. There are no decorations, unless you count the light. It spills from a small lamp near the hearth, whale oil, perhaps. The flame dances against the wall, and you notice something drawn there: a tiny sketch, etched with a knife into the surface of the turf. A bird, or maybe a horse, or maybe a ship, though it only looks like a half moon. It wasn't meant to be art, just memory. A fringe archaeologist once suggested that these drawings, found occasionally in old farmsteads, weren't for others to see. They were for the person who made them, marks to keep time, to keep company, to stay. You sit on the bench, the walls breathe, not with sound, but with presence. The thick turf muffles every echo, every breeze. You could speak a secret here, and the house would hold it. It's said that Iceland's first settlers spent more time indoors than outdoors during the winter months. The darkness lasted for weeks, snow piled high, winds howled, so families learned to layer the inside of life: tasks, stories, sleep, repair. A home like this wasn't just shelter, it was survival wrapped in moss and smoke and patience, and the rooms reflected that. One was for animals, sometimes, another for cooking, another sleeping and sewing and eating and remembering. There were no locks, no hard boundaries, just space, gently divided by habit. You close your eyes for a moment. You can almost hear the room as it once was. A baby fussing, a father shaping a bone hook, a mother stirring the pot with her left hand while mending a cloak with her right. The slow, deliberate cadence of domestic life in a place that asked for nothing but presence. You open your eyes. The fire has burned lower, but it hasn't gone out. It won't, because someone banked it just right, because someone thought ahead. In the same way they stacked turf on turf, not for beauty, but for warmth. You rise and walk slowly to the door. It's heavier now, the cold beyond it sharper, but the warmth still follows you, held in your bones. You look back once before stepping out. The roof looks like a hill, the door like a shadow, the house like something grown rather than built. And still, it stands. You close the turf door gently behind you, stepping once again into the hush of the Icelandic evening. The world outside has folded into itself. No clouds overhead, just a pale wash of sky, lit not by a sun, but by the idea of one. The horizon glows faintly, though you can't say from what. Your breath curls into the air, more from habit than from cold. The wind is gone for now. The grass doesn't move. Even the sheep in the distance seem to have stilled. It's not the silence of absence, but of agreement. The land and its people have both decided it's time to listen. You walk down a sloping path bordered by stone, softened by generations of moss. Ahead, a small gathering takes shape. It's not a crowd, just families, some seated on low rocks, others standing quietly, bundled in wool. A woman adjusts a shawl on an older man's shoulders. A boy holds a wooden bowl. A girl carries a sheaf of dried grass. This isn't a feast. This is a wedding. Not one of music or dancers or rich garlands. There is no decorated altar, no priest, no stage, just two people standing beside a fire that's been built low and deliberate. They don't face each other. They face the crowd. An elder speaks, not loudly. He doesn't read. He remembers. Names are spoken. Lineages recited, not for formality, but for grounding. In Iceland's early years, memory was the fabric of legality. A marriage wasn't just a union, it was a rearrangement of alliances, land rights, livestock, and kinship. If someone forgot who was related to whom, winter might get a little longer. You sit at the edge of the group and listen as the two are named, first by their parents, then their grandparents, and finally by the regions their families came from. There are no grand declarations, no binding rings, just the quiet acknowledgement, yes, this is right. And then, hands touch, not clasped, just laid together, palm to palm. The fire shifts, a few heads bow slightly. There's no applause, but there's warmth. Iceland's early marriage customs were spoken, not signed. Witnesses mattered more than scribes. A marriage could be made with an oath, a meal, a handshake, but once made, it was honored, even if feelings changed, even if the snow came early. You notice now the bowl the boy carries contains bread, flat, barley bread wrapped in a square of wool. He offers it to the newly joined couple. They break it together, not evenly, but intentionally. She gives her piece to him, he gives his to her. They eat, not because they are hungry, but because this is what it means to share a life, to make something, to pass it, to accept it. They will live, likely, in a turf house like the one you left. They will tend sheep. They will mend cloaks. They will fight sometimes, and they will speak little, but when they speak, it will matter. A few people begin to drift away, not because the event is over, there is no such signal, but because the moment has passed, and the warmth of home is calling. You remain seated. The fire crackles softly, and someone adds a small log. The glow deepens. One of the older women begins to hum, not a song, but a sound shaped by familiarity. It winds through the air like thread. There is a debate, of course, among scholars. Were Icelandic marriages truly based on equality, or were they simply less formal, less religious? Then in continental Europe, did love have anything to do with it? The sagas give conflicting reports. Some speak of fierce affection, of partners defending each other with axe and word. Others describe unions forged purely for land, for convenience, for peace between houses. Both are likely true. Iceland didn't make room for just one kind of life. You walk slowly back toward the path, leaving the fire behind. The bride and groom now sit together on a rock, their hands no longer touching, but their knees pressed close. Their names will be remembered now, not carved, but repeated. You look to the sky, still pale, still undecided, but beautiful in a quiet way. In Iceland, love never shouted. It didn't wear garlands or boast. It simply stayed. It kept the fire banked. It mended the sheep's gate. It remembered to grind barley the night before. That was enough. And here, beneath the soft hush of the open plain, with a fire flickering behind you and two names newly joined, it still is. The first snow arrives without announcement, falling in soft spirals that seem almost reluctant to land. Yet by dawn, the pasture you crossed yesterday has vanished beneath an unbroken sheet of white that blurs every boundary between earth and sky, leaving the newlywed couple's farmstead behind. You follow a narrow track marked only by a row of low stone cairns whose tops now resemble small loaves wrapped in frost. And for a moment, the world feels weightless, as if someone whispered away its colors to preserve what little heat remains. Inside the valley, wind gathers confidence, filling this air with a dry hiss that lifts snow from drift to drift. So you tighten your cloak and press on toward a cluster of buildings sunk deep into the hillside, their turf roofs now almost flush with the surrounding banks. Smoke from hidden chimneys threading upward like thin gray signatures against the palest blue morning. When you duck into the entrance passage, the difference is immediate darkness, then warmth, then the layered scents of wool grease, dried fish, and peat, each sharpened by the sting of cold caught in your hair and clothes. No voices greet you. Speech costs energy that must be saved for the months ahead, so people communicate with nods, with the scrape of a wooden spoon, with the quiet click of a spindle whirring just enough to keep fingers nimble. On a bench near the hearth sits a wheel of Skyr cheese, its surface dusted in salt that sparkles like ice crystals, and beside it lies a stack of driftwood planks, precious fuel carried ashore last summer, recorded in a tally stick, then rationed to last exactly until lambing season. One by one, thin slices are fed to the fire, each producing a bright snap that momentarily paints the walls, amber before retreating to embers the color of old iron. Survival here is arithmetic, performed in whispers. A family calculates whether 3 barrels of smoked mutton, 2 sacks of barley, and the sour milk fermenting in a lidded tub can stretch until the rivers thaw, and they weigh that sum against the certainty that storms will trap them indoors for days when even the doorway drifts shut. A mainstream fact seldom dramatized in the sagas, yet written plainly in later annals, is that an average early medieval Icelandic household consumed more calories in dairy than in grain during winter, because the climate, colder than Norway's coast and often lashed by sea ice, made milling unreliable, so people leaned on preserved curds, butter buried in bogs, and the protein in whey soup near the fire. An elderly man spreads a fur cloak over his knees and begins untying tiny knots in a length of twisted wool. Each knot marks a day since solstice, and each undone knot moves the household one breath closer to spring. A private calendar known as Dagatal Deersins, the beast's tally, a quirky custom attested only in a fragmentary 13th century note describing old folk who talk to yarn when darkness lingers, whether ritual or simple pastime. The practice feels necessary, as though counting knots offers the mind a foothold when snow erases every other measure of time. Yet scholars debate just how harsh those earliest winters truly were. Some climatologists cite ice core data suggesting that the late 9th century enjoyed a brief, mild phase, implying that settlement coincided with slightly kinder seasons, while other researchers argue the thin soils and rampant deforestation quickly exposed settlers to colder ground temperatures, meaning hardship grew within a generation, not centuries later. The truth may lie, as Iceland often does, somewhere between extremes, shaped as much by volcanic haze and ocean currents as by grazing practices and luck. You stand to help a young woman ladle thick sheep's milk porridge into wooden bowls. She steadies the pot with a hook fashioned from a ram's horn, and the steam coils upward, fogging the carved rafters that brace the turf roof, Each bowl receives a crumble of dried angelica root, bitter, medicinal, reputed to keep scurvy at bay, and when she hands you a portion, her smile is brief but real, because sharing food here is not courtesy, it is covenant later. As the household settles onto broad benches lined with straw and sheepskins, an older woman reaches for a half-charred log, blows on its glowing center, and sets it into a shallow stone lamp filled with rendered tallow. The faint light flickers across her face, softening deep lines that read like a map of seasons survived. In that glow, she begins a low chant, not a saga tonight, but a visor, a short verse praising the stubborn endurance of grass under snow, reminding everyone that even now roots are waiting, that the silence above is only temporary shelter for what grows beneath, outside. The storm intensifies, rattling the driftwood door and brushing snow against the tiny shuttered vent. Yet the turf walls hold, breathing warmth back into the room, absorbing each gust the way thick blankets absorb shivers. Someone hangs damp mittens near the ceiling where heat pools. Someone else scratches lines into a wooden board, an early account ledger, recording how many candles remain. You realize that no act here is idle. The small tasks of winter are threads, and if any thread slips, the fabric frays. Hours pass without clocks. Sleep arrives in shifts, dreams drifting between waking conversations about the next calving, the state of the fish racks, the length of driftwood still unburned. You doze beside the hearth, lulled by the distant thrum of snow on sod, the hiss of peat, the slow breathing of sheep sheltered in a pen that shares a wall with the human chamber. When you wake, the fire is a low ruby glow, and someone is already kneeling to feed it a sliver of birch bark, the smallest offering to summon morning. Through the roof vent, the first hint of dawn appears, a pale stripe of rose against charcoal sky, and though the valley outside remains buried, a faint drip of meltwater taps from the eaves, promising that the struggle with winter, however fierce, always carries within it the first softness of spring. Outside the turf walls, the snow has shifted, no longer falling, but breathing. It creaks and sighs under its own weight, adjusting to the low sun that's beginning to nudge its way up from the southern horizon. It doesn't climb, it leans. In Iceland, even sunlight behaves modestly. You step outside and the cold meets you like an old acquaintance. Not harsh, but present. The air is sharper now, the sky clear enough to reflect against the crusted drifts, turning the landscape into a soft, white mirror where the past seems especially close to the surface. Down the slope, a narrow path winds toward the shoreline. You follow it slowly, boots sinking slightly with each step. A curl of smoke from a distant turf chimney fades into the same blue-gray as the sea mist beyond, and in the distance the beach, not sandy, black, stones worn smooth by a language only waves can speak. And there, scattered across the shore like offerings the sea left behind, are objects not lost, not forgotten, just resting. A jawbone from a whale, a plank split clean down the grain, knotted sea rope hardened by salt and time. You stoop to examine a length of driftwood. Its edges are worn, but someone has etched a single groove into one side. Not decoration, a mark, perhaps counted, perhaps claimed. Early settlers depended on the ocean, not just for fish and ferrying messages between settlements. They depended on it to deliver what the land couldn't provide. Driftwood was currency, fuel, structure. It became roof beams, fish racks, cradles, and tools. It was recorded in early property claims. All wood found along this stretch shall be taken by the house at Breda Bostadur. One entry reads, in a 10th century land claim, scratched into calfskin with careful ink, a gift from the sea, provided the sea remembered where to place it. You walk along the beach now, eyes scanning the black pebbles. There's something else, a rib cage, enormous, weathered gray, the remains of a beached whale, now only a scaffold of itself, curved like a frame without fabric, in early Iceland. A whale's death was not tragedy, it was windfall. Its meat fed families, its bones shaped shelters, its oil lit the dark. Some settlers carved the vertebrae into stools, hollowed the skulls for troughs. A single stranded whale was a year's fortune. And yet, there was etiquette, ownership, even conflict. The sagas tell of disputes, quiet arguments, and sometimes bloody ones, over who had claim to a whale that washed ashore. One such saga, Ryder's Thatras, includes a comically indirect feud over a beached whale resolved not with duels, but with strategic storytelling. The sea may have given, but the people gave structure to its gifts. You kneel and touch one rib. It's warm from the sun, surprisingly, smooth. You imagine the people who came before, running fingers along the same arch, not to wonder, but to measure. Could this be used to frame a roof? Could it brace a boat further up the beach? Children, quiet ones, search through piles of kelp and bone, filling baskets with pieces of bark, feather, fish line. Their voices are hushed, not from fear, but from the kind of reverence that comes with knowing the sea only speaks when it wants to. You watch one child hold up a shard of glass, green, ocean tumbled so no longer sharp. She squints through it at the sun and places it carefully in her pocket. Not treasure, not waste, just a thing the water softened and gave back. A fringe theory found in a little red commentary on Icelandic beach rights suggests that some families believed whales were drawn to certain clans, choosing them as recipients. There's little evidence, no formal record, but it's the kind of belief that fits here, where the wind carries stories and the shoreline keeps secrets by scattering them in plain sight. You move inland now, up a slope of dune grass and frost-shattered stone, and pause at a small cairn. It's not a grave, not a marker, just a pile of rounded rocks. Carefully stacked, you add one. No reason, no ceremony, just participation. That's how these things start. Back on the ridge, you spot a man with a sled, simple wood, laden with sea spoils. He nods as he passes, says nothing, but on the sled a coil of netting, half a seal's skin, and something that looks like a weathered oar. He's not a fisherman, not today. He's a listener. The sea gives what it will, and the people take what they must, carefully, gratefully, quietly. You return to the shore and watch the waves. They don't crash, they arrive. They speak in phrases too long for memory, too short for translation. You can only stand still and let them finish. The shoreline fades behind you as you follow a narrow footpath inland, one worn not by cartwheels or hooves, but by quiet steps and repetition. The snow is thinner here, broken in places by exposed grass and patches of stone where wind has scoured the earth clean. Each footfall makes the faintest sound, less a crunch, more a soft shift, like fabric pulled gently through sand. Ahead, a figure stands near a flat boulder, hooded, unmoving, their cloak pulled tight against the breeze. In one hand, they hold a small object, stone, perhaps, or bone, balanced between finger and thumb. In the other, a simple knife. They are not carving. They are preparing. You approach slowly, and only when the figure turns do you see it clearly, a piece of dark slate, no larger than your palm, inscribed with runes. The edges are smooth, shaped by thumb and time. The markings are shallow, yet distinct, neat cuts angled just enough to catch the light. You don't ask questions. You sit beside the boulder and wait. The air here is heavier, though nothing moves faster. The clouds roll slowly above like gray beasts asleep in the sky. The wind doesn't whistle, it watches. The figure sets down the stone and begins a simple task, etching another symbol onto a new piece of slate. Each stroke is slow, deliberate, not because of artistry, but because the meaning is more important than the shape. This is not a decoration. This is protection. The Norse settlers who came to Iceland did not leave their gods behind, but they did not carry them loudly either. By the time Iceland was settled in the late ninth century, belief in the old gods, Odin, Thor, Freya, was already shifting. Some settlers brought with them traces of Christian influence. Others clung quietly to charms and staves. But most lived in the overlap, where myth was practical and faith was not an argument, but a comfort. The carved runes you see now may be letters, but they may also be Galdrastafir, magical staves, symbols meant not for storytelling, but for shaping the world, to ward off illness, to protect sheep, to guide a traveler home. Some were worn as pendants, others were hidden in walls or carved into tools. This person, elder or youth, it doesn't matter, is creating one now. There is no chant, no ritual, just breath and blade. Fringe scholars have argued that the earliest settlers in Iceland were among the most syncretic of their time, not pagan, not Christian, but something in between. Archaeological evidence backs this. Graves from the 10th century often include both Thor's hammer and crosses, runes and Latin letters, charms and psalms. It wasn't contradiction, it was layering. Belief here wasn't a matter of declaration, it was practice. If the wind was harsh, you sang to Thor. If childbirth came, you whispered to Mary. If your sheep disappeared, you drew a stave in the dust and placed a stone beneath the lintel. The figure beside you finishes the rune. They lift it to eye level, checking it not for accuracy, but for feeling. Then they set it with the others, carefully lined along the boulder's edge. You recognize some shapes, a fishhook curve with a central point, a seven-armed burst like a snowflake, a spiral ending in a cross. Not all are from the rune stones of Sweden or Denmark. Many are unique to Iceland. Some have no name, no translation, just meaning. You rise and continue down the path, the landscape folding into long, low hills. A sheep wanders across your trail, alone, unworried. Its wool is thick and matted, its gait slow, it passes without pause. Ahead, you spot another marker, a flat slab with faint carvings, half hidden beneath creeping moss. You kneel and brush it gently. The symbol is worn, perhaps a protection stave, perhaps just a personal mark. The Icelanders of the early centuries did not always sign things with their names. They signed with belief. There's a debate, of course. among historians. Were these markings truly magical or merely symbolic? Some argue they were mnemonic, ways to remember verses or instructions. Others say they were tools of the mind, like knots on a string or the rhythm of walking. But the people who carved them left no explanations, only the signs themselves. And so they endure. You come to a farmhouse where a woman is tying twine around bundles of dried herbs. She works quickly, efficiently, wrapping stalks of angelica, crowberry, birch bark. She places each bundle into a pouch, not for medicine, not for tea, for hanging, above beds, in windows, near the lambing pens, not because it's superstition, because it's tradition. When you ask her why, she answers with a shrug and a half smile. It helps, she says, then returns to tying. You linger in the doorway. The room is quiet. A stave is carved into the beam above the hearth. You trace it lightly. It's been touched often, by fingers, by time. Perhaps it's for peace, perhaps for luck. You step outside. The sky has darkened again, not from weather, from night. You walk beneath it, past stones and runes and faiths that do not require answers, only attention, only care, only belief. Spoken in symbols that outlast the hand, the clouds stretch low and silver across the hills as you descend into a small hollow, where the snow has thinned and the grass presses close to the earth, as if it, too, is kneeling. A line of stones guides your steps, flat, water-worn, evenly spaced, leading to a doorway so modest it could be mistaken for a storage hut. But as you approach, the air changes. It warms slightly. The wind hesitates. A soft hush wraps the space, not as silence, but as listening. You duck beneath the turf-covered arch and step inside what was once one of Iceland's earliest churches. It's barely larger than the last turf house you entered, a single chamber with thick walls made from layered sod and stones, and a roof pitched low against the storms. There are no pews, no altar draped in linen, only a rough-hewn table at the far end and a narrow window where daylight threads through in long, reverent lines. This is not a cathedral. This is shelter for faith. In the early 11th century, Christianity came to Iceland not with crusades or flaming swords, but with agreement. The Alþingi, the same quiet parliament you visited, made the decision to convert collectively in the year 1000. There was no war, no mass burnings of idols, just a consensus Iceland would be Christian, publicly, privately. People could believe what they wished, and so these churches began to rise, small, humble, constructed of turf and driftwood. They did not replace the land, they joined it. You sit on a low bench, your back against a cool wall. Above the table, a simple wooden cross hangs, dark with age. It isn't adorned with gold or carved with holy figures. It's two pieces of wood lashed together with a bit of spun wool. At its base, a stone bowl holds melted tallow and a single wick. It's not bright, it is enough. Mainstream scholars note that Iceland's churches evolved from domestic spaces. The first were often built beside or even inside longhouses, so the sounds of animals and cooking fires were not far from prayer. There was no separation between sacred and everyday. You thanked God with the same voice you used to count your sheep. A child enters, barefoot, cloaked in a length of wool. She carries a dried fish in one hand, a curl of birch bark in the other. She places both beside the table. An offering, perhaps, or just her share. She doesn't speak, but she lingers. You smile, she smiles back. The early Icelanders didn't ask their churches for miracles. They asked for weather to hold, for livestock to birth safely, for frost not to come early. Prayers were practical, short, often muttered while working. A whispered psalm over the butter churn, a cross traced in the air before lifting a lamb. A fringe account recorded in the 14th century suggests that some families painted tiny symbols, half cross, half stave, above the doors of their churches, not out of defiance, but caution. If the old gods were still listening, it was best not to offend. No one talks much about that now, but the carvings remain. You step outside again. The clouds have parted just enough to reveal a rim of sun on the horizon. It doesn't rise. It lingers, pale and full of distance. The bell beside the church, if it can be called that, is small, not cast in bronze, but hammered from scrap iron. It dangles from a beam tied to a length of fishing rope. Someone has rung it before. The wood beneath is worn smooth by the same hand. Again and again, you touch it, but you do not ring it, because the space doesn't ask for notice. It asks for presence. Further down the slope, you see other buildings, tiny, windowless, softened by wind and weather, perhaps storehouses, perhaps cellars, and perhaps chapels once, then homes again. Here, spaces are not strict in their purpose. A room becomes what it needs to be. Sacred today, storage tomorrow. No protest. That flexibility is part of how Christianity survived here, not by enforcing, by adapting, and the people they wove their beliefs into the daily weave. A cross beside a milk pail, a psalm sung in the same breath as a cradle song, a funeral marked not by incense, but by bread, broken beside a stream. You walk now beside one such stream, narrow, quick. Its banks are etched with hoofprints and boot marks. At its edge, a plank spans the water. On it, a carved symbol, a cross. Yes, but beneath it, 3 dots in a triangle, a stave. Even here, even now, both are kept, not in conflict, in conversation. You sit on a rock, listening to the stream. The church behind you has no choir, no towering nave, but it has survived, because it asked only what the land could give, because it left room for silence, and for those who entered, needing nothing more than shelter, and perhaps a little warmth. You walk with the cold now, not against it. The air carries no bitterness, only clarity. Your steps are muffled in a thin layer of new snow that has settled across the high plain like a sheet drawn over a sleeping house. Each drift wraps gently around the stone fences and turf roofs you pass, rounding edges, softening angles. Even the sheep have gone quiet, their breaths forming small clouds in the stillness. Ahead, a low trail winds up a shallow ridge. No one walks it quickly. This isn't a place to hurry. You climb. At the top, the land opens wide, but never empty. A simple farmstead lies below, nestled between slow curves of hill and stream. The house is long and low, a grayish mound beneath a roof, stitched with moss and old grass. Smoke rises straight from the chimney without argument. You descend slowly. When you reach the threshold, the door opens, no greeting, just a nod. Inside, warmth wraps itself around your shoulders, not just from the fire, though it burns with soft confidence in the center of the room. The heat comes from the thick silence, from bread left cooling on a wooden board, from the hush of dried herbs rustling against the ceiling beams, from wool slippers set neatly beside a stool. This is a house where things are not forgotten. They are simply left to rest. Someone gestures to a bench. You sit. Bread is passed your way, dense, round, dark with barley and something faintly sweet. The crust cracks slightly beneath your fingers. No plates, no ceremony, just hands. You take a bite. It tastes like smoke, like stone, like long winters softened by short summers, like care. This bread is not a luxury. It is a rhythm. The people here speak sparingly, not out of suspicion, just preference. Early Icelanders knew that warmth was best preserved when you held it close, that words, like fire, should be used intentionally, so the conversation, when it comes, is slow, weighted, so practical, but never cold. They ask where you've come from. You tell them. They nod. Someone passes a cup of sour milk. Someone else returns from outside with a small log of driftwood, dried and ready. You help feed the fire, not because it is low, because it is shared. There's a book on the shelf. Its spine is cracked, its pages hand copied, likely a psalter or a saga, maybe both. Iceland's early literacy, rare among Europe's farthest settlements, grew not in silence, but in stillness. Monasteries, yes, but also homes, quiet homes, where reading was neither spectacle nor skill. It was survival of memory. A fringe scholar once suggested that Icelanders read to stay warm, not literally, but as a way to extend inner life through long, dark months, to keep minds moving when feet could not, to carry each other forward, word by word. You touch the edge of the book, then let it be. Later, someone begins to sing, not loud, not to perform, just a tune to mark time, a melody made of 5 or 6 notes, repeated gently, shaped by old vowels and the smoke in the singer's chest. The others don't join, but they listen, the kind of listening that is its own reply. You close your eyes. The house breathes around you. The fire shifts. The snow deepens outside. But here, in this quiet moment, you are not watching time pass. You are inside it. And now, the house is still. The fire has burned low. The bread is eaten. The wool is folded. The snow lies undisturbed across the hills beyond the door, and no footsteps interrupt the quiet. Let yourself settle here. Let your breath slow, like a kettle left to cool on the hearth. Let your thoughts unspool softly, like a skein of yarn resting in an open palm. Tonight, you've traveled through Iceland's earliest memory, not with conquest, but with care. You've walked the soft earth beneath turf roofs. You've sat beside ancient stoves and watched law take shape without parchment. You've listened to sagas without names, carved runes with no translations, and watched bread rise beneath moss-dark rafters. You've seen that survival here was not built on boldness. It was shaped by steadiness. And so, as you drift into rest, hold on to that, to the quiet strength that doesn't shout, to the warmth that lingers in worn stone and shared loaves, to the silence that doesn't ask for sleep, but offers it anyway. You are safe here. Nothing more is needed. No saga to finish, no law to remember, only this moment, only this warmth, only this slow breath, and maybe, a dream that smells faintly of turf and barley and smoke. Good night.